stuff, I've noticed with that I have an injury around money anyway, which
Yep.
I know, which I haven't got to the bottom
The whole
of.
planet does.
Well, I'm feeling it quite hard for me.
The whole planet does.
But thinking that, oh, well, it's all going to go away anyway, it's not helping. It doesn't help
course it
at all.
doesn't help.
Because I've realised that it's not, money is not the issue, it's something else.
What is it?
Lack? I don't know.
The problem with all these things, including the money issue, is the same. And that is, you are a soul. And you are one half. And you're the feminine half of this soul. And at the moment, this soul, it ain't two joined. So let's draw that. I'm talking about yours with your mate.
Yep.
Is that not true?
I think so, yes.
Yep. So there you go, like that. We're this soul. This soul has a whole group of emotions in it. And it doesn't matter what you tell it. It's still going to do the same thing while those emotions are present.
Yep. Yes.
That's the thing we need to address. The fact is that something's got to change in the core of us before we'll think differently.
Yep.
We don't want to try to think differently, because trying to think differently doesn't work. How many of you have tried to do that through your life? Mm-hmm. Have you found it very effective? I have not found it very effective myself at all. You know, there's the old thing that, the law of attraction with the, what's it called? Secret stuff. Yeah. Where they say, you imagine and you try to think about having $1 million and you write out $1 million check. I know many of you tried that and it didn't work.
No.
Why? Right? Because there's this thing called your soul, which is full of emotions inside of it, full of desires, full of passions, but it also has injuries in it. It has emotional injuries out of harmony with love in it. And while those injuries remain, it doesn't matter what you think. My assume, is it? Okay. It doesn't matter what you think. What will happen is what you feel. And see, we're so used to thinking our way out of things, are we not? Mm. And this is why we don't get out of them. Because it's until we feel our way and release the underlying emotional reasons why we choose to do things, that is the only time we'll get out of doing them, that we'll stop doing them. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. The issue you've raised, Teresa, is money.
Yep.
So I know, for example, that money is just a piece of paper. This is my intellectual paper, or in our case here in Australia, plastic. Right? That's all it is. It has a value attached by the world around me, does it not?
Yep.
I know that value. Right? And yet I still think it's so important that I'll sacrifice almost everything for it. I'll sacrifice my relationship with my wife. I'll sacrifice my relationship with my children. I'll spend 40 hours a week working to spend 10 hours a week with my children. Now, does that sound to you like a reasonable thing to do, logically? But this is what we do because money has become so important to us that we're willing to sacrifice relationships for it. That's how important it's become, isn't it? Now, there must be an emotional reason why we do this. And I put to you that it's fear. Fear of what?
Death. Survival. It's a survival.
So, survival. Fear of death in the end.
Yeah.
For yourself, death. But survival, fear of not being able to survive. What else?
Humiliation.
Okay, yeah. In what way? If I have no money, it means I'm not worth anything.
Yeah, and people will take advantage of me.
Okay, yes. So what would you call that? People might control you. So we're worried about issues of control. Now, historically, all of this is true, of course, but historically it's true because we have the emotions in us. You see, what I put to you is once you release all of those emotions about money, you will no longer have them in you. And when you no longer have them in you, ironically, you'll have all the money you need to survive without working at all.
Is there any others?
Sure.
I can think,
me?
yeah.
Keep going.
Keep going.
No, I'm just asking.
Yeah,
Can you-
definitely want some more.
Well, no, I'm just wondering if you could see any others because I've been
I can
looking.
see some others.
There's a couple
Yeah.
more in you, yeah.
Yeah.
There.
Yep.
There's one, it's sort of a block. Well, it's pretty big actually. Responsibility, we talked about it earlier.
Okay, yep.
There's an emotion, Teresa, for you about taking responsibility for yourself. And that's why when the piece of paper goes away, you know the issue's still going to be there
Yeah.
because it's about care of yourself and taking responsibility for your life. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Do you want me to, Do you-
Yep. Yep. No, because I blame the world. I know that.
Yeah, blame the world, want
Yeah.
someone to rescue me
Yeah.
from this issue,
Yeah.
which is actually an issue of my self-care, my self-love, that I will take care of my life and, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. There is literally heaps of emotions, hundreds of emotions in different people about money. When we release them, it's really remarkable how our life changes. What will happen when you release it is you will never go to work again in a job you don't love. Ever.
Just that would change heaps of these things, wouldn't it?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You will never do something you don't love doing after that point. And people go, yeah, he's just nuts now. Maybe his mum should have committed him to an asylum, right? Yeah. And the truth is that what I'm expressing to you is real. You will find, once you release the emotions related to the fears that you have about money, from that moment on you will embrace your passions and desires. And honestly, you personally, each of you, have had demonstrated you through other people's lives how embracing passion and desire does result in having all the things you need. For example, many of you know of famous people who all they wanted to do was sing. And all they did was they just kept on it, embracing this desire to sing. And eventually, many of them became famous and also had the money that they wanted. Does that make sense? But how did that happen? They were paupers when they began. Many of them were like some of them recently, some of them were even in jail 10 years ago. And yet now they're multi-millionaires through their desire to just sing. How did that happen? Well, it happened because they had desires and they were no longer afraid. A lot of times they were afraid of money, I'm saying. Obviously they might be afraid of other things. But when we fully embrace our pure passions and desires, it's remarkable what happens around us. Yeah? All of a sudden things come to you that would never have come to you before. Ever. Yeah? So it's only fear that stops us from embracing our desires, isn't it? Only fear.
And for a lot of people, this money thing, and this sort of linking to what I was saying before, if I take responsibility for my life and I'm in charge of it, and I don't need, like, the man doesn't have a role for me, will he still love me? Will there still be a connection? Like, a lot of us are afraid of the other addictive things that go on between families and partners and whether they'll still be in connection with us.
So if I as a woman have all the money in the world, how do I know which man loves me? They might all want me for my money.
I did have a lot of control over my husband over money.
Yeah. Well, often what we do is we get rid of all of our money, then we're paupers, and now the man who comes to us really loves us for our money. For not for our money, but for ourselves. It's a proof, internal proof.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of times. Yeah.
Thank
Can you
you.
see?
Yep.
Yep. Fab?
Just on that topic, people, well, I'll speak on behalf of myself, but, you go to work and you
Yep.
do your 40 hours of, the job that you hate, and
Yep.
you get enough money to pay for your responsibilities.
Yeah, yeah.
And in that, there's always, like I've noticed, like I've been doing this for nearly more than a year and a half, but the money thing for about a year, there's always some law of attraction that I actually hurt myself while I'm at work. Constantly hurting myself at work.
Yeah.
And, then I will go through this whole patch of, we just don't do the job anymore. And then you got no money. And
Exactly.
then all the fears come up, and because you don't deal with the issue of the fear, you just end
You
up
can't get another job,
Exactly.
which helps calm down all those fears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also the fact, okay, well, I only do, 2 days a week so I can pay my bills and then spend the next 5 days doing what I love to do. And then that works for about a week or two, and then you're like, that's not enough, because then I'm going to miss out. There's an extra bill and there's the school bills and all. It keeps building up because I haven't dealt with the fear of the money.
And this is what I'm saying to you, actually. Unless you deal with this in a real way, nothing is going to change.
Right.
And that's the key thing to understand about God and God's universe. Unless we deal with the soul-based creations, not our intellectual creations or what we think we want, but rather what the soul is actually creating through its spheres, what we need to do is deal with those. When you deal with those, all of a sudden, everything changes. That's when you get offered a job that you actually like, for example.
Isn't it like sort of, just say you engage in your desires,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what your desire is. In my case, it's music.
Yeah.
So you
Yep.
know what your desire is, but in doing that music,
Yep.
all the other stuff starts to come up, like guilt that you're spending too much time doing it.
Yeah.
Then you're being indulgent. You're not. You're not being responsible. You're not giving to anyone else. Your kids are missing out. Your partner's missing out. All these things come up just by doing a desire,
Ah.
and then you got all these other bunch of fears that you have to deal with at the same time.
Yeah.
So you drop that desire and go back to work to make money.
Mistake. That's
Yeah.
where the mistake begins, you see. What I do is I just let myself feel overwhelmed with all of those pressures and just let myself have a good ball about it, right? Honestly, I do. And let myself deal with my fears in that moment. Now, it took me to lose all of my money before I dealt with my money issues. So I had a stage in my life where I had about $4.5 million worth of property, and I was doing property development. And what would happen is I'd just sell one property, and then I'd get really tight. I had about $22,000 payments going out per month. That's how much of debt I had going. And initially I could do all of that because I had a fairly lucrative business that I did computers with. And but after I stopped that, then of course I had to sell property. But you know what? I sold one property every single time. It was just before the bank would foreclose on me about it. Then I sold the property. Right? And after a while, what I learnt was, that's all about my resistance to dealing with my money issues. Now, for me, my money issues were linked to my first century life, believe it or not. Bit of a ponder about that. How would that be the case? Well, actually, my death in the first century happened because of money. See, what was happening was the Jewish Sanhedrin, which was linked through an incestuous relationship with the Roman Empire, the Jewish Sanhedrin, of which the leaders of which were Sadducees, had these arrangements going on with the taxation, with the people. And the arrangements were basically that they could skim some money off the top of the taxation. Right? So they created all these temple taxes. And they used to get, what would be now be billions of dollars a year probably, but they used to get it in gold. They used to get 2 to 3 tonne of gold every year, right? And they used to get 20 to 40 tonne of silver every year, which was for their personal use. So you had some very, very powerful men with some very, very powerful connections with Pilate and the procurators of the Roman Empire running the districts. And they used to get all this money and use it for their own selves. Very little of it would find its way to the temple. Now, a guy comes along like myself and starts telling the truth about everything that's happening, including the truth about what's happening to their money. What's going to happen to that fella, do you think? Well, there were quite a number of attempts on my life before they eventually got my life, and my death was the result of this money issue. It was really an issue with power, who would have power. You see, the more and more informed the population became, the more informed of the truth that the population became, the less power the people in power had. And that makes sense, doesn't it? The more informed and truth we understand, the less power the people who want to keep us blind to the truth have. And eventually the people like that say, well, we've had enough. And my death was created through that event. Now, because of that, I had lots of emotions about my death and related to money and authority. And I spent many weeks, actually, letting go of those emotions to the point where eventually I had no money left. And ironically, that was when I dealt with the last of, or the majority, I should say, not the last of them, but the majority of those emotions. When I had no money left and no prospect for any.
Did you find that when you started to deal with your desires, that you had all those kind of guilt and sort of things come up for you as well, or?
Less so, no, not for myself. Mary does
I do.
have those.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, I haven't experienced those so much. You know, feelings of guilt about providing for others and so forth was not... I've always provided for my family and my children and everything, but I had some stuff to do with my children in particular, certainly. But I dealt with that quite early on in comparison to the other emotions which were dictating my life.
But can you see, Fab, how, you know, we were talking the other night when you were at a talk about following your desires and how when you step into your desire, everything ramps up and everything gets triggered. So, ironically, all of your money issues just get triggered when you go into your desire. They're the same issues they're the same fears. Like, they're not about money themselves, are they? They're about fears of being judged as not responsible, fears of, you know, being self-indulgent and, you know, just out for yourself and all of that.
Guilt of the woman's projection that you're no longer a provider and you're not very sexy, no longer being a provider and all that kind of stuff, right?
Well, the father projections are being irresponsible.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
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 So,
No
and
respect.
a lot of the block to that is like fear of dad. How does dad feel when I'm not responsible? That's your block to releasing the emotion, you know, so...
But once you release the fears in a true sense, you create a whole different thing. So what we often do is we exercise our desire, it triggers some fear, and so what do?
Squash the desire.
We go back to fear. Can you see it's like a big pendulum? Desire, and then we get that triggers another fear, and we go back to fear again. We don't actually go to the middle point, which is releasing the fear so there's no more fear and there's only desire. And ironically, when there's only desire without fear, now everything we desire will be created.
Yeah, and you remember how you had a talk about softening into the fear?
The fear.
Not, you know, trying to be all tough about
Tough it out, yeah.
So you try to do... I've tried to do that, and it sort of starts to come up, but then it just gets to a point where I didn't even recognise that it is fear. Like, I'm just so confused about what's happening. Is that fear? Am I not scared? And trying to feel into it, and then just go straight back into an old pattern.
Yeah.
Well, as we've pointed out many times, most of us have an extreme fear of fear. In other words, we believe that's the worst possible emotion you could ever feel, and we try to prevent ourselves from feeling it as much as possible. And we've got to give that up, because the reality is feeling your fear in many cases is the doorway into your grief that controls your life. And unless you're prepared to feel your fear, you'll never enter that doorway. You'll get to the doorway, it's there closed, and you grab hold of the handle, you start pulling it open, and you have a look at the monster behind, and you go, no, I think I'll close that again and go somewhere else. Every time we do that, we're still creating the same things in our life, and we've got to work our way through them. Like we're trying to work against our own soul's creation. We're better off grabbing the door handle, flinging it wide open. In fact, probably better, kicking the thing in so there's no door that can be put back, and we feel the fear of what's confronting us in that moment. And be overwhelmed by it, allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by it. And once we are overwhelmed, we will go through the emotion of fear of these different things that we have deep within us. They're deep within the human race, these feelings, and we release them. And when we release them, ironically, from that moment on, for the first time in our life, we'll feel fearless. We'll be able to live in our desires. Now, it's getting pretty late.
Just to add
Yep.
about the fears, what I did, Fab, because I couldn't. I was like, I can't even get to the door.
Mary would go up to the door.
Yep, I'm afraid of that. I'm going now. There was no opening, nothing. And I had to do two things really firmly in order to start to soften into fear. And one was remind myself of the truth about fear. So do you know what I mean by that? That my fear is a block to my grief. That what I fear is not necessarily going to happen, and that God created me to be able to experience fear. False expectations appearing real. The second thing I had to do, though, was go, okay, that's the truth. I'm not going to, because what I used to do was defend my fear to everyone. No, it could happen. No, what's the point in releasing that? It's going to happen anyway.
So Mary
He's going to die.
Mary would be saying to me,
You're going to die.
This would happen very frequently in our early part of our... You're going to die anyway. So what's the point of ever being close to you?
It's not fair. It's all going to happen again. No.
That's what she'd say to me.
Angry about my fear. So I had to go, okay, this is not the truth. And even if that happens, I can be a loving person. I'm using my fear as an excuse to be angry and resist and avoid God and avoid my soulmate. So I had to remind myself of the truth, that my fear is not the truth. The truth is different. But then I had to go, okay, but I don't believe that in my heart. And that's because I have a whole set of beliefs that are false about fear. So that's where the real work happened for me. I started to go, what am I afraid of if fear overwhelms me? How's it going to look? How are people going to treat me? What am I going to start to believe about myself? If I let fear, I feel crazy. People are going to think I'm weak and take advantage of that. I don't even know what that's going to look like. And what if it never ends? Fear will never end. All of these things I had. Who have I seen who's been afraid in my life? What was that experience like? Have I ever seen my parents be afraid? What do my parents tell me about fear? Got to tough yourself. All of these things that were blocks to me experiencing fear. And I wrote it in my journal. I wasn't bashing down the door yet, but I was going, okay, let's take another step closer to the door. I'm going to remind myself of the truth about this and have compassion that I'm not opening the door yet, but I'm heading in that direction. What can I start to break down? What can I talk to God about? And what can I grieve even? There was grieving in that process of, I'm even just afraid of being humiliated. And I cried about that before I even got to experiencing the fear. So those two things really helped me a lot. AJ's been much more humble to fear. Like he had it triggered and he went into full body feeling of it. For me, I've had so much more rigidity around it. And I'm still going through resistance, submission to it. So yeah, that helped. Truth, false beliefs, compassion for self in the process. Yeah.
So that all began from a question from Patricia, which was how are you being prepared for the future? And these are all part of how you're being prepared for the future. You see, can you imagine how your fear, if you don't deal with it now, when everything's going really quite smooth in your life comparatively, how difficult are you going to find it when the world that we know it is falling down around you? It's going to be pretty intense then, isn't it? So it's far better to try and deal with as much of it you can now, or learn how to deal with it as much as possible now. And so my feelings are, if you can allow yourselves to connect to God and allow yourselves to release these fears, then things will progress well. But I still haven't answered your question completely, so we'll have to do the rest of that tomorrow, perhaps, because it's now 25 to